Hi, I'm Staci Neustadt. I'm a speech language pathologist and CEO at Making Sense of Autism. Susan Golubock is an autistic retired occupational therapist and our founder. So I oftentimes ask Sue questions that pop up either in my therapy world or in other therapists. And since this month, October, is AAC Awareness Month, AAC stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. I thought we would talk about this because it really isn't, I feel like it's not black and white. It's not AAC or speech. It's
Mhm.
really an and. And so I want you to share today, Sue, share your perspective on why sometimes traditional oral or verbal communication might not always be the best way for autistic individuals to express themselves.
Well, research has shown that motor coordination and uh, sensory awareness of our bodies is a real challenge for us. Um, and so coordinating the tongue muscles to move it around and even where the tongue is to produce sounds can be a real challenge to developing oral speech. Um, uh, for me, it's more the coordinating the breathing with speaking that I don't do easily. So therefore, I run out of breath and I feel like speaking is a big effort for me. Um, I know uh, others that they can speak at length and very articulate, but they do fatigue and they will resort to using an AAC device to continue to communicate because they just out all the energy they have that goes into the motor action of speaking and coordinating that those muscles and body parts to be able to produce oral speech.
Yes. And I see that with my clients I work with who have a hard time. Either they are labeled apraxic, and so that whole motor planning piece really impacts them, which all the research shows AAC and speech generating devices help with that. And I like how you mentioned that if an individual is just fatigued that day or wakes up and their sensory system is just not working for them today and they may need to use alternative communication, which honoring all communication is super, super important. So we kind of talked a little bit about AAC, and some people think of speech generating devices like iPads and whatnot. And there's a gazillion apps out there these days that people can load. But what are some other ways that people can support autistic individuals in that alternative communication arena? What are other ways other than a speech generating device?
I think that many, a great part of communication between speaking individuals is body language. And I think we don't always teach autistics to read body language or understand how they might be able to use it as a shortcut. You can use a gesture like, and that's going to say, whoa, stop right away to anybody. It's going to be a sign. You don't have to produce the words to get your message across. So there are some commonly accepted shortcuts that we could readily teach autistics, but we don't think to because most because language is so easily for most people, they don't think in terms of what their body is automatically doing to convey messages. So they don't think on a cognitive level, gee, I should be teaching this um, in terms of a form of communication because I understand it very well if someone does it to me. So that's another form. But I also think it's really important that communication is two ways. So if you are using spoken language to communicate to someone, your expectation is that they will use the same to communicate with you. Now, when you're teaching someone to use an alternative way of communicating, then you are going to have to, as a communication partner, be willing to share in that communication. So if you want to ask them a question, why can't you use the AAC device to ask them the question? Why do you have to say it verbally and they have to answer in a different? It's confusing. That's not the way people communicate. So you do have to be respectful of being a communication partner in using the similar kinds of communication. If they're not up to verbal speaking, why can't you join them in alternative ways of communicating?
Yes, and I see that my clients whose parents use the AC device as much, if not more, than their child that child picks up on using the device very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost bonds them because they're both communicating in the same way. So that is really excellent advice for both therapists and parents, that if you're wanting to teach a different language, whether it be gestures or high tech AAC, to use it yourself. And so you're both communicating that way. Um, Great advice, because I think, those misconceptions of, if somebody can't communicate orally and we give them a device, they're just automatically going to learn how to use it, is a big myth. So you have to be using it with
Mm-hmm.
them, and then also respecting all forms of communication. If an
Mm-hmm.
individual uses a gesture, which you're suggesting we teach those gestures as well as teach reading those gestures, and then respecting that. When our emotional brain takes over, sometimes that language doesn't come out. And I have to say, my client I've talked to about a few times in some of our conversations, who's been working on problem solving, he actually asked his parent if he can come up with a list of gestures that he can use, because he figured out that he can't always access his language when he's upset. He asked if he can come up with a list of gestures he can use and that everyone understands what that gesture means. And so and this kiddo is about 7 or 8 years old. So if a 7 or 8 year
Wow.
old can come up with that, then we
Mm-hmm.
can use that too. So awesome. So accept all forms of communication, model and use the same language the individual is using, and you're going to see a lot of progress. So great
Mm-hmm.
information for AAC Awareness Month. Thank you, Sue.
Hey, thank you, Staci.